Well, I don't know about you, but I enjoyed that video that we saw, and just the fact that somebody would say, "I'm going to go to this place." And one of the things I like about it is, I don't know if you can find a harder place. It sounds like, and what a perfect example. I mean, she stands out like a sore thumb where she is for sure, and so it's not like she's a hard target, and yet God has kept her safe. Was she happy or was she not? She was a happy person, and she wouldn't do. It's one of the things that you just know she wouldn't trade that life for anything. And the person that says, "Yeah, I'll go do that. I'll go do that," and I think sometimes we overemphasize a call, and we expect this call to be some kind of writing in the clouds or some Bible verse that just jumps out. And I say, look, there's 5 times that God said, "As the Father sent me, so send I you. I'm going to give you power from on high, and you shall be witnesses. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." And it's kind of like 5 times. How many times do you need? That's the call right there. You need. Do you have a call to do what you do? And what does that look like? If you do, fantastic. Do what you do. But man, what an opportunity. And like I've said, I think earlier in the week, pick a country and there's space for you there where you can give the gospel. And it's exciting. I would just love to go and ask her, tell me your stories. Tell me how this got started. Tell me the first people. What are some of these young men doing now as they're going out? How many radio stations? How many people do these radio stations communicate to? How many countries have you sent people into? What are the reports coming back from there? That's very exciting. And I would also try to find people like that and see what they're doing across the world, because you'll find that God is doing some exciting work in places that you've never heard of. I have a book that I've read. It's my favorite missionary biography. It's called Bruchko, Bruchko. Anybody read that? You haven't read that? I'm shocked. Okay, I really am. He might still be alive. That's one of my favorite parts about it, is that Bruchko may still be alive, and because there's so many missionary biographies that you can read that these people have been dead for a long time, and so it feels like so much distance between us. But this guy was 17 years old, grew up in Minnesota, and by reading the Bible was brought to Christ, reading the Bible on his own. And then 2 weeks later, his best friend came in his house and was explaining to him that he was born again, that he got saved. And he was like, "That's what happened to me. How did this happen to you?" And he said, "Well, my church." And so he's like, "Your church talks about this?" Because he went to a Lutheran church that did not talk about the gospel. And so he went to his friend's church and lots of story there, but saw a missionary come in, and that was the first experience he'd ever had with someone that went to another country to tell people about Jesus. And so that man was going to South America to tell some natives there about the gospel. And so he tried college for a semester. It didn't work out, decided that he would go to Venezuela to give the gospel to natives. And all he had no support from his family. His church really didn't support him because, well, it's not like they sent him money or anything, but he didn't have a missions board, and the missions board wouldn't take him because he didn't have a Bible college degree, but he felt like that's what God wanted him to do. He had enough money to buy a one-way ticket and then $70 left. And so he went, and the missionaries there basically rejected him because he didn't have a missions board or support. And so they felt like they shouldn't be supporting him either. So he ended up rooming with a communist for a while, and found a doctor that would go out to these natives, went out with him a few times, and finally said, "I want you to leave me." And so he left him, and then you've just got to read the book. But let me tell you, the simple faith of a person without training turned a country upside. It wasn't Venezuela, turned a country upside down. I don't think he even knew he was in that country to start with because of things that had happened. And just some amazing, miraculous things. And it's such an exciting, I don't read books twice. I've read this one at least twice. And if you have an Audible subscription, at one time it was free on Audible. But it's fantastic. And one of the things that I know I'm giving a spoiler here, but one of the things about it was as I have taken this Project Go, and we've gone to Madagascar and in Colombia, places where there are no churches, there's no gospel, sort of like this lady. That's, some of my burden has been, well, what about the people in, you name the spot, like favelas in Brazil? What about those people? What about the natives in the jungles of Brazil? They don't let people out there. The country of Brazil does not let people into but they need the gospel too. I don't know if you've ever seen those videos of planes flying over and unreached people. I mean, unreached by anybody. And I think, who's going to reach those people? Well, I was reading Bruchko, and the people that he led to the Lord said, we want to give the gospel to people. And they went over the Andes Mountains into the jungles of the Amazon and gave the gospel to those people. You know what I thought? God gets the gospel where God wants the gospel to go. He's going to do it. And you can be a part of it, or you can be left behind. You can be not used, but that's your choice to be used or not to be used. And you should read the book. It's not very long. It's very compelling. And you need to read anyway. Everybody needs to read. It's good for you. I was a youth pastor for 7 years. And during that time, I got to know teenagers, and teenagers like to memorize annoying things. I know that. I was one. And and some of those are commercials. They'll memorize whole scenes from animated movies. My daughter does that, and she can quote them. And sometimes, like, I know you've told me this 100 times, but sometimes it's a commercial jingle. And there was, when I was a youth pastor, there was a whole set of commercials about getting a free credit report. Do you remember that? You don't remember that? I didn't remember that. And this whole jingle about freecreditreport.com. It was a whole song. And I could, if I thought about it long enough, I could probably quote it to you, because on the way to camp one year, my teenagers in my bus for 10 hours kept repeating that jingle until the whole bus was doing it. And so guess what happens? You've been driving all day, you drop them off at the camp, and you go to your room as the bus driver or youth pastor, you lay down, and guess what you're thinking about? And you're like, I just want to think anything else besides this, anything else. But you get something stuck in your head, and that happens to all of us. You heard something, you didn't even want to hear it, but you heard it. And so now it's stuck in your head, and you just want to kick it out. Well, we're going to look at a verse tonight that there's a phrase that we need to get this phrase stuck in our head. So turn to Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10, only one verse. Romans 10:1, Paul says, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. We'll read it again since it's small. Romans 10:1, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. It's that last phrase, that they might be saved. If we could get that phrase stuck in our head, so that when, as we had somebody cut us off in traffic on the way here, that we would say that they might be saved. I didn't say that, but I should have thought that, Or when somebody treats you rude, that instead of feeling like we feel, we would say, you know what, they might be saved. That I would see them as a soul, as someone that's going to spend eternity somewhere. That is the first step in us being the people that we need to be as missionaries where we live, is to see people and think the thought that they might be saved. And Paul here, I see this brethren as his plea. Why is he saying brethren? Because Paul cannot win all the Jewish people to Christ on his own. This is a repeat, basically, of chapter 9 and verse 1, where he expresses his burden for them. But he's saying, brethren, I can't do this. It's my heart's desire and prayer that they might be saved. And later in the chapter says, this is where he says, how can they hear except someone preach the gospel to them? I can't do this on my own. It's his plea. This is the plea of, I think, every missionary, that we need more help. As an evangelist, I see it all the time. I have churches asking me, do you know of anybody that we can call because we need a youth pastor? We need a Christian school teacher. I know of a couple churches that have contacted me and said, we need a pastor. And I'm like, if I take one from here, they need a church. What am I supposed to do? There's not enough people to do the work of the ministry. This is what Matthew 9 told us on Sunday morning, that the harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. That not ought to be the case, because I won't be part of the harvest. That I should be part of the harvest, saying, look, this is great work. Gathering the harvest is joyous work. Look at this lady Carol and tell me it's not joyous work. And she's saying, just if you can come for a week, come for a week. If you can come for longer, you'll have more joy. One of the things I think about this is I don't even know if I have 80 years. I'm already halfway through it, but we have no guarantee that we have 80 years. But even if we do have 80, even if you're one that lives longer than that, what comparison is that 100 years to your first 1,000 in eternity? You know, what comparison is it? We'll do things and spend part of our day exercising or dieting or whatever it is, so that we can have a benefit. And we'll say, yeah, that hard work, was it hard? Yeah. Was it fun? Maybe not, but the benefit far outweighs the work that I had to do. The work that we can do in this lifetime is nothing in comparison to eternity. Why would I waste my life here for nothing and then live in eternity and have nothing? And this is one of the things that is a scriptural principle. But Paul is saying, look, I'm on this journey and I need help. I read a story back in 2004. I just remember this, December of 2004. It's one of the greatest tragedies that in my lifetime, for sure, that's ever happened. We'll say a tragedy happened when, multiple people die in an event, and, we'll say 100 people's a lot, but this tragedy that happened in most of our lifetimes, over 250,000 people died. Remember what that was? There was an earthquake in the Indian Ocean, and it caused a tsunami. Remember that tsunami now? Yeah. 250,000 people died because of that tsunami. That's an incredible amount. I didn't remember at the time knowing that it was that many people. But some stories came out of it. One was of a little girl who was on vacation with her family. And there's a phenomena that happens when a tsunami comes in. And that is the water recedes back into the ocean because it has to go somewhere. The water has to come from somewhere. We think it comes from out in the ocean, but the momentum does, but the water doesn't. So when that water rushes out, a couple of things happen. It goes out further than normal. So it leaves some shells exposed that wouldn't ordinarily be exposed. And so when that happened, there were people that went out and rushed to grab those shells because this was their opportunity to get maybe the shell find of a lifetime. There's also people that, like the man that I talked about last night, who it's their living to get fish. It recedes so quickly that fish just drop out of the water and they're flopping on the sand. Well, this is a gold mine, just go and pick them up, put them in your bag or your net or whatever, and you've made it. But what they didn't realize was that there's a tsunami coming. That little girl had written a paper in her grade school about tsunamis. And so when she sees this happen, that thought was triggered. This is a tsunami. And she tells her family, look, we got to get out of here. But they didn't just say, okay, it's just us. We need to tell all these other people too. They've got to get out of here. There's people that are today, they're gathering shiny things in life. They're trying to pick up another fish, another dollar, another day. And they don't see that there's danger coming. And we need to warn them. The problem is some of those people going to get the fish and the shells are us. Why would they act like there's an emergency if I don't act like there's an emergency? Why would they act like there's a great need to turn to Christ if I don't act like there's a great need for them to turn to Christ? And this is Paul saying, look, this is something that we can't do tomorrow, but we have to start today. I need to help doing this. This is God's call to his people. This is the Great Commission. And so we have Paul's plea. We also have Paul's passion. He says, brethren, my heart's desire. I have had some heart's desires, and I'm thankful that the proverb or the Psalm tells us that when we commit our way to the Lord and trust in him, that he'll bring it to pass, that he'll give us the desires of our heart. Now, I've learned that isn't a red Ferrari. And I'm kind of glad because I don't know what I would do with one anyway. I would speed, and that's not good. But I remember as a I don't know, probably fifth grader, Walmart was the place to go in rural Kansas. That's what you do. And so when my parents would go shopping, grocery shopping, I would go to the toy section. And this is in the development. I'm telling this for the young people that don't understand this, the development of the remote control car. Because a year or two before, I had been given a remote control car under the Christmas tree. And then when I took it out of the package, I was severely disappointed because it's not really a remote if it's connected with a wire. And that's what they didn't tell us, is that, yeah, you've got this remote, but you've got to follow this thing around like a dog on a leash. And it's just not the same at all. And so that gift was a dud. But technology, it advanced, and I loved it. And there was a truck, not a car, a truck. It was a yellow truck with monster tires on it. It even had to have a wheelie bar because you could make it go so fast that the front end would come off the ground. And so, man, it's pushing all the buttons. And the remote went from being, the old school ones used to be just a knob that went forward and backward and left and right. And those were tricky. They were tricky. You'd think it's simple. It wasn't as simple as it looked. But the new ones, you got probably like they still have today, you pulled a trigger to go. And I think that everything with a trigger is better. It's just a lot more fun. And so, yeah, you get to pull a trigger, and the wheel, the steering wheel was like a tire on that thing. It just was made so much more sense to me to use it that way. And, I was so excited about this because there's no wire on it. And every time I went to Walmart, I had to drag my parents over there. And it was the kind of thing I remember strategizing. I'm not asking them for 5 gifts or for 3 gifts or for 10 gifts. I'm asking for 1. I don't want anything else. I don't care what it is. I want this one thing. And so that they would focus on that. And I had to remind them of it. And I know how they were because I'm a parent. I get it. They would go and they'd kind of act like, oh, okay, whatever, and I'm like, no, you've got to understand. And I did end up getting that for Christmas. And those things die away. Isn't that the sad thing that you're all wrapped up in something and then you get it and it's not that much longer. It's not as big a deal anymore. You get that new phone and you're like, oh, this new phone, it's so shiny, and it's got rounded corners or it's got pointy corners or what I mean? It's like, and then you're not so excited about it anymore. But this is a heart's desire. I think a preacher said, there is endless novelty in serving God. And I would say I've been in ministry now for 20 years. Yeah, there's endless novelty in serving God. To see God change a life never gets old. It never gets old. And to hear a testimony of how the gospel came into somebody's life and how it changed their life, that's exciting. And to see God use you in a way, I have a notebook that I carry with me to jot down thoughts. And in that notebook, there's a letter that a girl gave me a couple years ago. And in it, she tells me that when I first was diagnosed with cancer, I happened to be at their church. And I preached a message, and she was not saved, but it touched her heart. And then I preached a youth rally the week following that. And because of all those things and other people in the church, she trusted Christ, and just how thankful she is that God used me. And I keep that in there as a reminder of that. What a special thing that is to know. And I'm like, I didn't even know what was going on. I'm just there doing what I feel like I'm supposed to do, not knowing what God is doing in somebody's life. And that's what ministry is I'm going to put myself in the place of God's using. And although I don't necessarily feel what God is doing in somebody's life, I have to trust him that he is, because that's what he promised that he would do, that he would take his word and he would use the Holy Spirit, that it would not return void, and that he would show people the glory of God in the word of God, and that he would change them into his image. That's what I do. I don't know what God's doing in your heart, but I trust that he's doing something. And so Paul is pleading and he's telling them, this is my heart's desire. Look how great his desire is. Look at verse 1 of chapter 9. He says, I say the truth in Christ. it's almost he's repeating himself saying, I'm telling you the truth because you're not going to believe what I'm telling you. He says, I lie not, my conscience also bearing me witness in the Holy Ghost, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh. I don't have that kind of burden, that I would wish to be accursed from Christ so that someone would know him. I don't. I believe that's a burden that God can give me, because is this not the burden that Christ had? That for your sakes, he became poor, that you through his poverty might be rich, that he died so that you could live, that he was forsaken so that you can be forgiven. He was obviously willing to lay down his life, so he can do that through me. He can do that through you. And Paul is saying, this is my passion. We should ask God, God, make this our passion, that we would see souls and say that they might be saved. That we would say, hey, help me. I have a neighbor, I have a friend, I have a coworker, I have a family member, and I want them to be saved. Would you pray for them? Hey, I'm going to go talk to them tomorrow. Could you pray that tomorrow God would open avenues of communication, that he would open their heart, that he would show them his love through me, that I would be able to say something that God would use? Can you help me in that? Let's get together, let's have a meal and have them over, and so that we can love them together for Christ. This is it's his passion. And then we see Paul's preaching in all of chapter 10, most of chapter 10. He says in verse 2, he says, I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves into the righteousness of God. Paul's saying, look, I go everywhere, and we know this, go to the book of Acts. I go everywhere, and I find the Jews, and I bear them record that, yes, they're excited about God. They have a zealous following. He would say, I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. I was right there with him. Concerning zeal, keeping the law, there wasn't anything I left out. I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. So he says, I've been there, but they're going about to establish their own righteousness. They're going about to establish something before God that they can never do. And I've thought about this. There are moral people. There are good people in this world. There are people that in their mind, they're like, I haven't done a lot of great wicked things. Okay, that's fine. But that doesn't deal with sin. That doesn't deal with our hearts. And if they're honest, they'll say, yeah, when I look inside my heart, the reason I am trying to do these things is because I know there's something dark in there. And I have had wrong thoughts, and I have had wrong desires. Where do those things come from? From a wrong heart. And good deeds don't fix sin. You've got to do something with sin. Well, that's where Jesus comes in. And that's why he says Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. You don't have to establish righteousness before God. You can't. You can have his. He'll forgive the sin in the death on the cross and give you his righteousness in the resurrection. So this is Paul's witness to them. It said, this is my preaching. And, I think about this passage, and it is part of the Romans road. We'll talk about chapter 9 or verse 9. If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. And then we go to verse 13, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. This is all in 8 verses or so. You don't have to memorize a lot. In fact, you don't have to memorize it. You just have to know where to find it. And say, look, this is the gospel right here. It's such a simple thing. And echoing what I talked about on Sunday, I don't have to memorize a different message for a different belief system. I have to know Christ and what Christ does. And to be able to give a reason of the hope that's in me, the security that I know that God has me. And so it's Paul's preaching. It's what he did everywhere. And then I want to notice at the end of this verse 1, Paul says, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. When I was in college, I obviously went to a Bible college, but one of the blessings of that is every night in your dorm, you'll have a devotion time. And one of those nights, at least in our college, you'd have a room prayer. So you get together with the guys in your room. And actually, I had a lot of guys in my room. I think there were 7 of us total my freshman year, which is a lot. But everybody they've ever known that's been in that dorm would say it was the favorite dorm that they had because it taught them so much. It's hard to be selfish in a dorm room with 6 other guys. But when you're in those room prayer times, you learn people's burdens because they're not going to share some of these burdens with the whole dorm, but they would with just the room because you live with those people. And one of my friends, we're still close friends today, every Thursday night, he would ask the same request. He would say, pray for my dad. He's not saved. And his dad would come to events at the college where the gospel is being preached over and over and over. And I remember we'd pray for him, but there was something that happened every night. Every night. We had a very strict, and our resident advisor was strict about this. We had a policy that the lights go out at 11 o'clock on the weekdays and 12 o'clock on Friday. And so 11 o'clock happens. And I remember, I was a freshman, so I had a top bunk. He was a freshman, he had a top bunk. But mine was up against this wall, and it was just a regular wall. His was up against the wall where there was a window, and not just any window, but there was a fire escape that went out our room. And so there was a light right there coming shining through that window. And there were blinds, but that doesn't do the trick, So that was right there at his bed. But he would lay down. And then within seconds of laying down, he would always turn over and get on his elbows and knees. What do you think he was doing? He was praying. Who do you think he was praying for? Yeah, his dad. It's right there. Why? Because that was his heart's desire, that his dad would be saved. I think about that and I think, don't tell me that you love the lost if you don't pray for them. Right? How can you say that you do if you don't pray for one of them? And they're everywhere in your life. It's not hard to have a list. I have a 3x5 card, and my oncologist is on there. I have somebody that is an instructor for me when I'm there. He's on that list. I have people that I've met in camps. I have friends whose dads are not saved. I'm going to see 2 of those friends in a week or so, and their dads are not saved. And I have my list. You need to have I would not preach this if I didn't have my list, but you need to have a list. And it's not hard to start. You might say, God, show me the closest person in my life who's lost. It may be closest distance-wise, and it may be closest in relationship, but I should pray for them so that God can do a work in their lives. And then if I'm going to pray about it, I need to do something about it. That every interaction I have with them is an opportunity for me to either tell them Christ or show them Christ. So he's saying, brother, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. It was his continual burden. One last thing, and we'll be done. When I was planning this trip for Madagascar, I remember sitting in my office and the danger level had ramped up, and I'm not underplaying this because it was confirmed when we got there. The danger level had wrapped up pretty high. I had not told Janelle this, but I had life insurance, but I had it ready, and I told her the day before I left where it was, and then I had taken the time, and that's what I was doing in my office at this point. I've taken the time to write letters to each of my daughters, and because I honestly, I believe that I wasn't coming back. That's where it had been, but we believe this is where God wanted us to go. That's what we're going to do. And there was a lot of situations that made that difficult. People's parents talking to me, hey, take care of my son, and having to look them in the eye and say, I will do my best, because that was my plan, that I was going to do everything that I could to make sure that they're good, but I'm supposed to do what I need to do. And so as I wrote those letters, it was the hardest thing emotionally I've ever done. I would write and then I would have to stop. I just couldn't write. And so then I'd come back later and I'd write, and I haven't looked at them since that day. I still have them in an envelope. And I remember I looked at a clock in my office and I just started talking to God. And I said, Lord, am I doing this at this point because I've raised $10,000 or whatever it is, and now I feel embarrassed to say, well, what am I going to do? I've spent some of it. I bought tickets. I bought equipment. What am I going to do? How am I supposed to give this back to them? Am I not supposed to go? Am I doing this because I do have a sense of adventure and I'm like, oh, I want this sense of adventure. Why am I doing this? Should I just say no and not go? This is looking very dangerous, and that maybe I shouldn't go. And God has a way, when you pray prayers, be careful what answer he'll give you, of answering your question in a way that you cannot wriggle out of it. Because, I mean, it was words, it was pictures, it was everything. He said, if your daughters were there and they didn't have the gospel and no one was taking them the gospel, what would stop you from going? And I said, that's not fair. That's not fair. There's nothing. There's no plane. That's fine. I'll take a boat. There's no boat. I'll make a boat, right? I'll find a way. There's a way, right? When you're a parent and when there's somebody innocent in need, what stops you? Well, you'd say nothing's going to stop me. And the Lord said, well, somebody's kids are there. Somebody's brother's there. Somebody's sister's there. Somebody's parents are there. Somebody's daughters are there. Who's going to tell them if you don't go? I didn't have an answer for that. You think about it, and God never asked us to do something that he hasn't already done or isn't willing to do himself. He sent his son to die for us. Can I not live for him? Can I not look at people as he looks at people and say that they might be saved? Because what didn't Jesus do so that we could be saved? Literally everything. He laid his life down for us, and he promises us. And it was one of the things that I asked teenagers commonly. I'm like, look, if you would trust your eternity with God, you'd give it to him. Say, Lord, I trust you to save me and forgive me my sins, and I believe that you're giving me a home in heaven. You trust God with your eternity. Will you not trust him with whatever time that you have left in this life? He wants to prepare a place for you that you can't imagine how good it is. He's going to wipe every tear from your eyes. It's going to be a great time and a great place, and I totally agree with you on that. He wants that for you, but he wants your life to be miserable if you give it to him. What logical sense does that make? It doesn't. I preach a whole message on what can you promise yourself and follow through on it. You can promise yourself anything, but you cannot guarantee that you can fulfill that promise to yourself. But God has promised you joy and peace if you give your life to him. He promises reward. And he says, we just give it. And yet we say, no, I want to live it for me. I want to go accomplish these things in my life. I want to go and do that. You can't promise yourself that. But if you give God your life, he promises that you will have everlasting joy. And that he will one day say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. But you first have to say, okay, I will serve you. I will go. Will we see them as he sees them and say that they might be saved? With your heads bowed and eyes closed.